Thank you for joining us. Due to the pandemic, we are still conducting television interviews from home offices, as so many business and world leaders currently are. While we see the maximum is being done to address the worldwide pandemic and economic crisis, there's also a lot of tremendous positive news, not only with vaccines, but 3 new historic peace agreements in the Middle East. To tell us more, we have Israel's lead attorney in the Court of Public Opinion and world-famous legal scholar and author, Alan Dershowitz. He is recognized as one of the most distinguished defenders of individual rights and the best-known criminal lawyer in the world. We'll also be joined by Marc Goldman, who will share his thoughts as we all hope to see positive solutions implemented in all areas for all people in the world right after these messages.
Life Extension magazine brings you new discoveries in health and anti-aging. Our science-based research and supplements are so advanced they're many years ahead of the medical mainstream, with quality control standards that exceed FDA mandates. Life Extension has covered groundbreaking medical research for more than 35 years. For your health and future, you deserve the best. Learn more at lifeextension.com.
Alan, it's an honor to have you back on the show. And good Lord, what a strange time in history.
We live in interesting times. That can be a curse and a blessing. We're not bored, but we have no idea what the future will look like.
Rather shocking. I hate uncertainty. And again, this is the Shalom Show. We wish all good things to all people on earth and, of course, the environment as well. And I know you share these views. But this is the Shalom Show, and you wrote the book, A Case for Israel, and so many others we can maybe discuss if there's time. But uncertainty is very troubling.
Uncertainty is troubling. It's a lot better than the certainty that we had during the Second World War or other certainties that we've had throughout Jewish history and world history. And, in Israel, they say the difference between a pessimist and an optimist is a pessimist says, oy vey, things can't possibly get any worse. An optimist says, yes, they can. I'm an optimist. I think things could get worse, but I think they will get better. I think that, it was surprising to a lot of people that the coronavirus didn't unite people. But in the divided country in which we live, the divided world in which we live, the coronavirus divided people all over. In the United States, it divided people politically. In Israel, it divided people politically. In Great Britain, it did. In those countries in the world where it didn't divide people politically, like in New Zealand and Canada and others, they did a lot better. And I think we have to treat things like pandemics in a non-political, united way.
And of course, yes, I actually stated that myself earlier this year, and it's absolutely inconceivable that this, along with other discord, is kind of amplified, perhaps, by the media. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, the media creates the problem. It's the source of much of the problem. The social media more than the traditional media, cable television more than traditional television. But look, at the center of the problem is the New York Times, which has ceased to be the newspaper of record. You can't find out what the actual news is from the front page of the New York Times, because the front page of the New York Times has become the editorial page of the New York Times. It has lowered the wall of separation between editorial and news, unlike the Wall Street Journal, which has kept that wall of separation pretty high. So today, Walter Cronkite could not get a job on national television. He's too honest. He was too neutral and too objective. Today, you have to pick sides. And if you're on the wrong side, you're canceled. And if you're canceled, nobody wants to hear your voice. So we live at a time when we're seeing attacks on due process, attacks on freedom of speech. I have a new book out today just called Cancel Culture, the newest attack on free speech and due process. And we're seeing that happen all over the world. Harvard University today, there are petitions circulating to disallow Trump people who are in his administration or helped him in any way from speaking on the college campuses. That's a terrible, terrible thing.
It kind of is like an Orwellian nightmare coming into reality, actually.
Well, the only good thing is we have a constitution that's endured and that has protected, and we have separation of powers, and we have checks and balances. And the only crisis our constitution could not solve was the crisis of slavery and secession, and we needed to fight a war for that. But other than that, our constitution has managed to solve most of the problems caused by divisiveness in this country, sometimes with great casualties, like during McCarthyism and during immigrant bashing times. But I think mostly we have solved our problems through the rule of law. I hope that will continue.
The divisiveness that is taking place at this time in history is atrocious and extremely alarming. Right here in the United States, I've never seen such extremism. And of course, as you illustrated in other countries as well, rather than unite, people are not cooperating, particularly, to put it lightly.
Well, we've had crises like this before. Maybe this is the worst, maybe not. During the Vietnam War period, there was a lot of violence. I defended a lot of the people who were opposed to the Vietnam War, but there were people who did engage in violence. During the McCarthy period, during the lead up to the Second World War, we were a divided country. Europe was even more divided. In most Western European countries, the only two parties you could choose between were the Communist Party and the Fascist Party. Centrist parties were being marginalized. We haven't yet come to that in America. Look, the Democrats nominated Joe Biden, who was the centrist candidate. He defeated in the nomination process the more extreme candidates, and then defeated, presumably, we're not sure yet, the election isn't quite yet finalized, but Joe Biden's apparent victory is, I think, a victory for center-left rather than a victory for extremism.
There is so much talk about the influence of vast, immense corporations like Google and Facebook and other, Twitter. How is it possible that such immense organizations can have such great influence over people's thinking and alleged lies by omission distorting the outlook of millions and millions of people?
Well, we're not yet able to deal creatively and within the First Amendment with these mega media companies that control so much of our lives. Look, we've had major corporations before. The railroads had such influence on American life, and other great corporations, but they didn't tell us what to think, and they didn't tell us what news to believe or not believe. We're going to see some changes. We're going to see some controls of the media. There is a provision of the law, it's called Section 230, which gives platforms immunity from lawsuit if they just act as platforms, if they just allow anything to go on the platform. But once they start to censor and pick and choose what goes on, what gets priority, they're acting more like publishers, and their immunity, I think, will be taken away from them. So I think we're living through a change. This is not your grandfather's First Amendment anymore. It's a much more dynamic and challenging protection. And the next 20 or 30 years will determine how vibrant the First Amendment remains. Many students today, young people who will become the leaders of the future, have no tolerance for freedom of speech, no tolerance for due process. They think they know the truth, and there's no reason to have any process for disputing their truth. And that's a very dangerous phenomenon. It is very Orwellian.
Absolutely, and very, very dangerous. When will this immunity be removed, and when will it be possible, do you think, for you as an expert on the Constitution, no greater expert than you, sir, when will this immunity be removed, and when will it be possible for people to be given a balanced, truthful view of what's happening in the world?
It'll take a long time. I think the immunity will be conditioned fairly soon. Senator Ted Cruz and others have been working very hard on that. I think the law should be that if you want to be a platform, you have to be a platform. It's like being tax exempt. If you want to be tax exempt, you can't take political sides. Otherwise, you lose your exemption. if you want to have exemption from libel and defamation suits, you have to act as a pure platform. You can't censor. And once you begin to censor, you lose your immunity. I think that will happen in the near future, but I don't think it's going to return us to the days where you could turn on CBS or open up the pages of the New York Times and shake your head and say, yeah, that's the truth. I believe that. I think that's gone for a long, long time.
If ever there was a need for an expert such as yourself to use your intellectual powers to improve things in this world, now is the time. You've written so many books, you've represented so many causes, but I think the world needs you, Alan, today more than ever. What are you working on?
Well, I appreciate that. That's so nice of you to say. I do. I started as a result of that. I started my own podcast. It's called The Dersh Show, like my name, Dersh Show. All that's missing is the wits, and that's provided by my listeners and viewers. So I do think that I hope my voice will be heard. There are efforts to silence me. The 92nd Street Y has canceled me. They've refused to allow me to speak, even though I was their most popular speaker after Elie Wiesel. And if Elie Wiesel were alive today, he wouldn't set foot in the 92nd Street Y because they're engaging in McCarthyite censorship. They've canceled me because I was falsely accused. They told me they believe I was falsely accused. The evidence is overwhelming. I have emails from the woman admitting she never met me. I have emails from her best friend, tape recording from her lawyer acknowledging that she's wrong and that she couldn't have met me. I have an FBI investigation from the former director of the FBI. But the 92nd Street Y says, we know you're innocent, but we don't want trouble. So an accusation is the equivalent of a conviction, which is why I wrote my other book called Guilt by Accusation, The Challenge of Proving Innocence, in the age of Me Too. But I'm fighting back. I'm strong. I'm 82 years old. I hope I retain the strength to be able to fight back until the truth comes out.
Well, this is absolutely shocking for anyone to undermine you and waste your time on absolute ridiculous nonsense is just unbelievable, actually.
Yeah, well, there are lawyers who are villainous and at fault and behind all this. And there are women. There are most women who claim they are victims are victims. Women should be believed, but there are women who exploit the Me Too movement and try to get rich over it and try to get revenge. And we have to make sure that there is a process. That's why I've recommended establishing a Me Too court, an informal court of former judges. And a person who's been accused can take the case to that court, and the court would hear evidence and decide who's telling the truth. But people are not as interested in the truth as they used to be. Accusations are more important than truth to some people.
Of course, Alan, let me ask you, reflecting again on the historic peace accords created just a few months ago with now 3 additional countries in the Middle East and their significance. One of your political colleagues dismissed it as a mere distraction, which I thought was a great insult to the concept of peace in the Middle East. But what are your thoughts with regard to that and the future?
Well, I think that the Abraham Accords and the process that's moving forward is deserving of the Nobel Peace Prize. It is the most significant achievement toward peace in the Middle East in decades. And those who brought it about should be nominated. I'm a nominator because I'm a professor of law. And I will nominate those who were responsible for the Abraham Accords to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Will they get it? Will the same committee that gave the Nobel Peace Prize to Barack Obama 30 seconds after he was sworn in for doing nothing, give the Peace Prize to somebody they don't like who accomplished a great deal? I mean, the 2 possible groups that might get the Nobel Peace Prize for the Abraham Accords are either the 4 leaders, Trump, Netanyahu, and the emirs, or the people in the Trump administration, such as Trump and Jared Kushner and Avi Berkowitz and the Secretary of State and the ambassador to Israel. But the Nobel Peace Prize ought to be given for the great accomplishment of the Abraham Accords. They are enormously impressive. And those who say they're just a distraction are just not only wrong, they're doing it deliberately and willfully in order to make political points.
I don't see any other event in history currently that would be worthy of the Peace Prize.
I can't think of any event in the last year that would be more deserving of the Peace Prize than bringing about normalization between countries that have been antagonistic for generations. Now, obviously, it was a process and it was a gradual one. And other people deserve some of the credit for laying the foundation, but the breakthrough occurred during the Trump administration. And just like Yasser Arafat got the Peace Prize, which he should have given back when he renewed terrorism and violence, but he got the Peace Prize for helping to bring about the Oslo Accords. And there's no reason why the people who helped bring about the Abraham Accords shouldn't be seriously considered for the same honor.
I fully agree, of course, and would like to ask you about your thoughts with regard to cancel culture, this new term, and all these strange new phrases that are all around. For example, I was just told that using the term sexual preference is insulting. Well, nobody should actually call it a preference. But anyway, back to cancel culture, which I think is even far more important. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a terrible denial of free speech and due process. It gives a group of people the power to decide what other people will hear and listen to. And it gives them the power to decide who's guilty and who's innocent. It is pure McCarthyism. It's worse than McCarthyism because it's far more pervasive. And it's something of the future. It's done by people who claim that they're doing it for good and legitimate purposes. And it's dominant today on college campuses, and the college students are our future leaders. So I'm very, very concerned about it. And that's why I wrote a book called Cancel Culture, the most recent attack on free speech and due process. It's available today on Kindle and through Amazon.
Cancel culture. The McCarthy days, they were all right-wing. And now it is the left wing that seems to be embracing these strange philosophies.
I think the hard left and the hard right are very much more similar than they are different. They both are intolerant of dissent. They're intolerant of due process. They're intolerant of reasonable, moderate, nuanced views. They know the truth and they want their truth to be the only truth. And that's why we have to fight it, and we have to fight it hard. Today, there was a report on Fox Business News that students at Harvard were circulating a petition trying to get Harvard to ban anybody who worked in the Trump administration from speaking on the campuses. These are not students who want true diversity. They just want more people like them in the name of diversity. But the last thing they want are, for example, African-American conservatives or gay conservatives or people from different ethnic groups who don't represent their point of view. For them, diversity is a sham. It's just a way of getting more of them. Free speech, due process for me, but not for thee.
Alan, this is all extremely interesting and important. Before we conclude, share a final thought with our audience.
Well, I love being on your show because you always ask the best questions. And I hope people will keep challenging. Make sure that you don't accept the political correctness of any age or any time. Ask hard questions and demand truthful answers.
Sir, an honor as always. Thank you so very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It's my honor.
Joining us now is Marc Goldman. Marc, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on again. Thank you, Richard.
We just had Alan Dershowitz on, and you heard part of that conversation. We were talking about his original book, A Case for Israel, and other current books that he's writing, and one called Cancelled. This cancel culture. We talked about the incredible influence as compared to the way things were maybe 20, 30 years ago, where people had news that they received in different ways, perhaps hopefully more accurately. But today, these vast trillion-dollar companies are distorting people's values worldwide, whether it's Google, Twitter, and other. What are your thoughts with that regard?
I think that over these last 20 or 30 years, maybe even starting a little bit before, we've had a cancel God culture, because when it has continued to be what people feel or what they think and not realize that there are some fundamental principles that we all need to agree and live by, then we have the chaos which we see unfolding in front of us, and what we've seen over the last months, where there's actual chaos and complete disregard for what we would normally expect to be what we would call civilized human behavior. And somehow that's changed, that's been canceled.
Interesting term, cancel God. Please elaborate a little bit more on that, and actually how the abandonment of tradition and discipline, and of course people abiding by teachings and values which are imparted by religion, how this is really changing our world today.
One thought that occurs to me on that was when Madeleine Murray O'Hair filed those lawsuits to be an atheist, and that God could no longer be mentioned in school prayer and other things like that. And the fundamentals of it are this: when we recognize that there's one God, then we agree there's one set of rules that we will operate with each other by. When we say there is no God, which we continue to see on the left, then there are no rules except the ones that I decide I can make up. And that is what human history, when there's been essentially barbarianism and chaos. I mean, even during the Roman times, they had many gods. So if you were in a position of power, you could always pick the one that would agree with whatever you wanted to do, because that's the meaning of it. Unless there's one God and one set of rules of right and wrong, then where are we going? If I say one thing and I can do it to you, then what's the rule?
Marc, in your view, what can be done in this age of technology where things are so convenient to millions of people everywhere, perhaps excessively convenient, and people just irresponsibly discard good sense and principles and values, and there's an erosion of values? What can be done to restore human decency?
Well, I mean, technology, as you mentioned it, has in so many respects changed our ability to communicate, and so much more quickly. Unfortunately, we have so many of these people who have control over the technology, who are willing to spread disinformation and not allow the truth. Somebody sent me a thing the other day, which the way you can tell a story is true is if it's banned on Twitter, banned on YouTube, and banned on Facebook, then you know it's, and the Washington Post, then you know it's a true story. So, I mean, it's unfortunate, but they are feeding disinformation, and people have to be accountable that the truth is allowed to enter so that people can really get the right information. And this whole cancel culture, which seems to be supported by a lot of this big tech, and of course the whole left and the mass media, is taking away the ability to have a reasonable conversation and discuss the merits of any point of view. When you have the point of view, and especially when you want to talk about God, they want to shut you up before you even get started.
As we conclude, Marc, I understand you just received a book called Cosmic Puzzle. Tell us about it.
So the Cosmic Puzzle is a scientific investigation into the existence of God. It's written by Harold Gans, who has tremendous scientific credibility, who actually worked for the National Security Agency for many years as a top-level cryptographer, among other things. And the point being that when with God and we have rules, then there are a way of operating and a way of just having civilized behavior amongst all of us. And this is a perfect way of showing it objectively. This is proof. This is not opinion. This is not belief. And what's so interesting, I think, is the first commandment in the Bible. The first commandment says, I am God that brought you from the land of Egypt. So it's not a question of believe. You know who I am. I'm the one that just did all that stuff that you just saw. So it's not about believing, it's knowing.
All we can do is hope for the best for the entire world, all good people everywhere, Israel, the United States, people everywhere, and the environment as well. Thank you so very much for being with us.
My pleasure to be here. We all have to do our part, so that's great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely, Mark. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We know that in solving the many, many problems and our great challenges, faith is more powerful than government, and nothing is more powerful than God. Since the signing of the Declaration of Independence 241 years ago, America always affirmed that liberty comes from our Creator. Our rights are given to us by God, and no earthly force can ever take those rights away. Our religious liberty is enshrined in the very First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. The American founders invoked our Creator 4 times in the Declaration of Independence. Benjamin Franklin reminded his colleagues at the Constitutional Convention to begin by bowing their heads in prayer. Faith has forged the identity and the destiny of this great nation that we all love. Our nation will be renewed by hard work, a lot of intelligence, and prayer. We don't want to see God forced out of the public square, driven out of our schools, or pushed out of our civic life. We want all children to have the opportunity to know the blessings of God. Prayer changes hearts, transforms lives. It uplifts the soul, inspires action, and unites us all. We thank God for the faith of our people. We praise God for the blessings of freedom. And whether we are black or brown or white, and you've heard me say this before, we all bleed the same red blood. We all salute the same great American flag. And we are all made by the same Almighty God.
Life Extension magazine brings you new discoveries in health and anti-aging. Our science-based research and supplements are so advanced they're many years ahead of the medical mainstream, with quality control standards that exceed FDA mandates. Life Extension has covered groundbreaking medical research for more than 35 years. For your health and future, you deserve the best. Learn more at lifeextension.com.
This concludes our special show for today with Anna Dershowitz and Marc Goldman, wishing us all the very best. Thank you for being with us.